Hello, I am Jane. Have you ever gone through a tough time? A time you thought would never end? Days during which you could not stop worrying, overthinking, and crying? I bet they were horrible, right? We went through something similar a few months ago because of my irresponsible, selfish sister. I am so grateful that those days are over now. When I was 3, my mom had an accident on her way home from work. She died. Unlike me, Carla was a spoiled little girl, and at the time, she would not stop crying. For me, though, it was a bit different because I barely have any memory of her. It's not that I wasn't sad. I just wasn't as devastated as my older sister. I can't lie, though. I miss her. Not having a mom around isn't easy at all. My dad is a very kind man. He loves me and my sister beyond words, and he does his best to spend time with us, taking us shopping or hanging out, but it doesn't happen that often. He manages a big company, which makes him a very busy man. After my mom died, Carla received the most attention from our dad. However, receiving all that attention did her no favors. Everyone was giving her extra attention over what she ate, what she drank, and what she wore. Even her birthday parties were enormous. She literally had everything she wanted, but still, she wanted more. She really milked the attention. She knew that if she cried, she'd get whatever she asked for. I remember last Christmas so well. Dad had been working for a whole week to prepare the gifts, and the Christmas tree was barely visible due to heaps of wrapped gifts that he'd bought for Carla. Amazingly, though, when she unwrapped them all, she started screaming and crying because she did not receive a new phone. If Mom were still alive, she would have known exactly what I wanted, she said. Ugh. It has been 11 years since our mom died, and now Carla is about to graduate from high school, and everyone agrees that she's not very mature. She uses our mom's death as a way to get what she wants from our dad, and with so much spare money, he never says no to her. She's seriously greedy and selfish, and she rarely spends time with Dad and I, preferring to hang out with her friends instead. Dad always says it's fine, as long as she's happy, and I guess I don't really care because Carla and I have never been that close anyway. I always had this feeling that Dad must be very lonely. He refused to marry again after Mom died, as he wanted to raise us properly. That is why I have been trying as hard as possible to fill that gap he has in his life. Not just because I feel a sense of responsibility towards him, but because I actually love hanging out with my dad. He's so much fun. Meanwhile, Carla had started to go on dates with a guy who was older than her, and he looked a little scary. He had long hair, tattoos, and he rode a motorcycle. He was definitely not the right type of guy for my sister, and I couldn't understand what she saw in him. There was just something about him that didn't seem right. Obviously, Dad didn't approve of him at all, and he constantly tried to talk her out of it, but she never listened. She'd yell and scream at him and tell him how desperate she was to have someone around who would listen to her. She threw these tantrums because she was just up to her usual tricks of manipulating our dad so he'd let her go out with this guy. As time went on, Carla started to change. She was barely recognizable. Her look had changed that dramatically. She only wore black and started wearing a lot of heavy, dark makeup, even going so far as to pierce her tongue and her eyebrow. And as you can probably guess by now, whenever Dad tried to tell her that she was taking things too far, she would yell and scream and tell him that he did not know what was best for her, and that if our mom were still alive, she would have let her do whatever she wanted. During that time, Dad was conflicted. On the one hand, he didn't want to lose his daughter. She'd become so wild and so unlike herself. Where had his sweet little girl gone? On the other hand, he didn't know a better way to deal with her, especially as no matter what he did, she'd just fight back and see him as controlling. I'm quite a bit younger than Carla, but even I had the sense that something bad was about to happen. However, never in my wildest dreams had I imagined just how bad this something could be and that it would change our lives forever. One night, Carla came into my room and asked me to cover for her that night. She told me that there was a concert for a rock band in the city and that her boyfriend was going to take her to that concert and that he had already bought 2 tickets for the 2 of them. She told me that she had to go or it would affect her popularity. I didn't feel good about the whole thing and so I refused. But pretty soon I had to accept because she was begging me and it was really annoying. Eventually, I said okay, on the condition that she didn't come home too late. She hadn't even been gone for an hour when I heard her coming home. I was relieved. Now I could sleep. In the morning, she didn't want to see anybody and said that she wasn't feeling well. She also wanted to skip school that day. My dad offered to take her to see the doctor, but she refused and said that she was just feeling sick and that she would probably feel better by tomorrow. So then Dad left for work. I went to her room before getting on the school bus and I entered without even knocking, demanding to know what had happened last night. I was expecting her to start yelling at me like she usually did, but this time it was different. Surprisingly, she hugged me and started to hysterically cry. I looked at her face and what I saw there left me speechless and horrified. Her face was covered with bruises. There were blue bruises next to her left eye and her mouth as well. I was so shocked. I actually screamed when I saw how bad she looked. What is that? Who is the monster that did this to you? It must be your freaking boyfriend, I yelled. She wouldn't admit that it was him who'd done this to her, and she said that she and her friends had fallen off her boyfriend's motorcycle. I didn't believe her, but I had no proof. The next day, she was starting to feel better, and she decided to join me and Dad for breakfast, which was something that hasn't happened for a very long time. I noticed my dad smiling. He was genuinely happy that Carla had decided to join us for once. What made him even happier was the fact that she was wearing her normal clothes again, a pink blouse and short blue pants, with her hair off of her face. When she'd walked in, I was terrified of what Dad would say when he saw the bruises, but of course she'd covered them all up with makeup. I mean, she wasn't that stupid. "You look stunning, darling, exactly how your mother used to be," Dad said. Then there was silence. It seemed so weird to me that 2 nights ago she'd been dressed all in black, and then today she was just back to her normal self again. Clearly something major had happened. But that didn't really matter. All that mattered was that Carla was finally back to normal again. Over the next few days, Carla was back to being her cheery self. Until one day, I was at home playing video games when I heard a vigorous knocking on the door. I looked back only to see Carla running to her room crying. The way that she looked terrified me. I left what I was doing and followed her to her room. Once I was in her room, I saw her face covered in tears. I asked her what had happened. Barely able to answer, she said that on that night when she asked me to cover for her, she'd gone out with her horrible boyfriend and that for a while now, he'd been asking her for money, using his mom's illness as an excuse and saying that he had no money to pay for her medication. So she said she'd been giving him money every time they went out and that now she had none left. How stupid was she that she'd fallen for this lie? I was furious. However, she didn't just do this because she wanted to help his mom. She also did this because every time she gave him money, he'd tell her how pretty she was and how much he loved her. He even introduced her to more friends and helped her become popular. And that was exactly what she needed and loved, to always be the absolute center of attention. But the last time he asked her for money, she refused to give him any. So he asked for the gold necklace she was wearing, which had been our mom's. And of course, she refused to give it to him, which led to him brutally hitting her and yelling that she was worthless and that the only reason she was popular was because of him. Then he said that with one flick of his finger, she'd go back to being a nobody. She couldn't bear what he had done to her. And so she decided to disappear from his life for good. But today, he'd sent her a long, threatening message. She was crying so much that she couldn't even tell me what the message said. So I grabbed her cell phone and read,